What if I told you that the sacred calendar you follow, the very rhythm of your spiritual year, might be built on a profound and ancient error? What if the dates you observe for the most holy days, Passover, Pentecost, the Day of Atonement, are a deviation from the original divine blueprint? This is not a question of minor liturgical differences. This is a question of cosmic alignment, a question of obedience. For centuries, there was a war. It was not a war fought with swords and shields over land or thrones. It was a war for time itself. A silent, theological conflict waged between two competing systems, two different ways of counting God's holy days. And on one side of that war stood the religious establishment, the priesthood of the temple, with their complex calendar based on the shifting, unreliable cycles revealed from heaven. But on the other side, based on the unwavering consistency of the sun, guardians of what they claimed was a more ancient, a calendar of 364 days. And they believed that following the wrong calendar was not simply a mistake. It was a sin. It was an act of rebellion against the very order of creation. Today, we are going to investigate this lost calendar. We will uncover its perfect architecture, explore its divine origins as recorded in the Book of Jubilees, and expose the brutal conflict it created within ancient Judaism. This is more than just a history lesson. This is a warning. It is a case study in how human tradition, convenience, and power can corrupt even the most sacred of God's commands. And it will force you to ask yourself a deeply uncomfortable question. Is the way I mark God's time based on His eternal pattern or on a compromise made by man? The clock is ticking. Let the investigation begin. Before we descend into the heart of this ancient conflict, we must first understand the system that emerged victorious, the system that has defined the rhythm of Jewish worship for millennia, the traditional Hebrew calendar. This is the calendar you will find in synagogues today, the one used to determine the dates of every modern Jewish holiday. At its core, the official Hebrew calendar is a lunisolar system. This means it attempts to reconcile two different celestial cycles, the cycle of the moon and the cycle of the sun. Its months are based on the moon. A month begins with the sighting of the new crescent moon and lasts for either 29 or 30 days. This creates a lunar year of about 354 days. Now, anyone can immediately see the problem. A year of 354 days is roughly 11 days shorter than the solar year, the 365-day cycle that governs our seasons. If left uncorrected, the holidays would quickly drift. Passover, the spring festival, would eventually be celebrated in the middle of winter. The fall feasts would arrive in the summer. To solve this, the ancient sages developed a complex system of intercalation. They periodically added an entire extra month, a leap month called Adar II, into the year to realign the lunar calendar with the solar seasons. This system is an impressive feat of human calculation and observation. It relies on a sophisticated 19-year cycle to determine when to insert these leap months, ensuring that the holidays remain anchored to their proper agricultural seasons. This is the official story. It is a system that is functional, deeply traditional, and has been the backbone of Jewish life for thousands of years. It is a calendar of human wisdom, a testament to the ability of the rabbis to create order and consistency out of the shifting cycles of the moon. But to the authors of the ancient texts we are about to investigate, This very complexity, this reliance on human calculation and periodic fixes, was not a sign of wisdom, it was a sign of error. It was a deviation from a much simpler, more perfect, and divinely ordained system that had been forgotten. Now, turn away from the shifting, complex cycles of the moon and prepare to encounter a system of breathtaking simplicity and perfect mathematical elegance. This is the calendar revealed in the Book of Jubilees. The system it claims is not a human invention, but a divine institution. It is the calendar of heaven. At its heart, the calendar of Jubilees is a pure solar calendar. It completely ignores the phases of the moon, which it considers to be a source of error and a temptation toward pagan worship. Instead, it is based on a single, unwavering number, 364. Why 364? You need to understand the divine mathematics at play. The number 364 is unique because it is perfectly divisible by 7. 364 days is exactly 52 weeks. Not 52 weeks and a day, like our 365-day Gregorian calendar. Not a fluctuating number of weeks like the lunar calendar. Exactly 52 weeks. This single fact has a revolutionary consequence. In the calendar of Jubilees, the days of the week never change. A date on the calendar will fall on the exact same day of the week, every single year, forever. There is no drift. There is no need for human correction. It is a system of perfect, repeating, and predictable harmony. The Book of Jubilees declares that this is no accident. This is the divine architecture of time itself. This is the calendar that was recorded on the heavenly tablets from before the foundation of the world. This is the calendar that the patriarchs, Enoch and Noah and Abraham, followed. And this, it claims, is the one and only calendar that God commanded Moses to restore for the people of Israel. This is not just an alternative way of telling time. This is a theological declaration of war. The author of Jubilees is stating that there is one true calendar, and it is a calendar of divine order, symmetry, and perfection. And any other system, particularly the lunar-based system of the religious establishment, is not just a different calculation. It is a counterfeit. It is a human invention that has usurped a divine institution. And as we are about to see, the implications of following this counterfeit calendar were, in the eyes of the author, catastrophic for the spiritual life of the nation. To fully appreciate the revolutionary nature of the 364-day calendar, we must look at its internal architecture. It is a masterpiece of divine symmetry. Unlike the seemingly chaotic lengths of the months in our Gregorian calendar or the fluctuating months of the lunar calendar, the calendar of Jubilees is built on a foundation of perfect repeating patterns. The year is divided into 4 seasons, each season being a precise and equal unit of time. Each of the 4 seasons consists of exactly 91 days. Why 91? Because 91 is a spiritually significant number. It is 7 multiplied by 13. And more importantly, 91 days is exactly 13 weeks. This means each season begins on the very same day of the week. According to the texts from Qumran that use this calendar, the year always began on a Wednesday, the 4th day when the sun, moon, and stars were created. Therefore, spring began on a Wednesday, summer began on a Wednesday, fall began on a Wednesday, and winter began on a Wednesday, every single year, without fail. Now let's look at the months. Each 91-day season is further divided into 3 months, but these are not lunar months. They are standardized months within the solar structure. 2 months have 30 days each. and the third month has 31 days. So each season follows the same perfect pattern: 30 days, 30 days, 31 days. This adds up to 91 days. Multiply that by 4 seasons, and you arrive at the perfect total of 364 days. The beauty of this system cannot be overstated. Imagine a calendar where you never have to ask, "What day of the week will my birthday be on next year?" Imagine a world where the great holy feasts of the Lord are not floating targets, but fixed anchors in the weekly cycle. Passover, the 14th day of the first month, would always be a Tuesday evening, leading into a Wednesday. The Feast of Unleavened Bread would always begin on a Wednesday. The Great Day of Atonement would always be a Friday. This is the core of its appeal. It is a calendar of divine order, not human chaos. It reflects the unchanging nature of God Himself. There are no unexpected shifts, no need for a council of priests to meet and declare the start of a new month based on a fallible human sighting of the moon. The sun rises and sets with unwavering precision, and so too, according to Jubilees, does God's sacred calendar. It is not something to be figured out, it is something to be followed. It is the rhythm of the universe, set in motion by the Creator Himself. Where did such a radical and precise calendar system come from? According to the Book of Jubilees, it was not the product of human astronomical observation or mathematical calculation. Its origin is far more ancient and far more authoritative. This calendar, the text claims, was revealed, not invented. It is a direct transcript of the celestial order, a piece of heaven brought down to earth. The author of Jubilees traces the pedigree of this sacred knowledge back through the most righteous figures of antiquity. The first human to receive this revelation was Enoch, the man who walked with God and was no more. In the wider body of literature from this period, including the Book of Enoch itself, Enoch is portrayed as a scribe of righteousness, a man who was taken up into the heavens and shown the secrets of the cosmos, the courses of the sun, moon, and stars, and the divine laws that governed them. It was Enoch who first wrote down the perfect 364-day year as revealed to him by angels. This sacred knowledge, this calendar of heaven, was then passed down and preserved. It was Noah who safeguarded this knowledge through the cleansing waters of the great flood, carrying the books of his forefather Enoch on the ark. He then passed this divine system on to his sons, and through them to the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Finally, at the ultimate moment of revelation on Mount Sinai, the cycle was completed. When the angel of the presence dictated the history of the world to Moses, he was not introducing a new calendar. He was restoring the original, forgotten one. The command to follow the 364-day year, as presented in Jubilees, is woven throughout the entire narrative dictated to Moses. It is not just a good idea, it is the foundational law of time itself, repeatedly referenced as being ordained and written on the heavenly tablets. This is a critical claim. By tracing the calendar's origin to the heavenly tablets, the author is making an audacious theological move. He is elevating it above any other system. The lunar calendar of the temple priesthood might be a tradition of men, but the 364-day calendar, he argues, is the law of God. The lunar calendar might be calculated from observations on Earth, but the solar calendar is a direct copy of a reality in heaven. This is not a debate between two different astronomical models. This is a confrontation between divine revelation and human tradition. And for the author of Jubilees, to choose tradition over revelation is to choose the path of disobedience. The author of the Book of Jubilees does not just ask his readers to accept the divine origin of the 364-day calendar on faith alone. He embeds a brilliant and subtle mathematical proof within the pages of his narrative, using one of the most foundational stories of the Old Testament to demonstrate the perfect harmony of his system. That story is the Great Flood. In the book of Genesis, the timeline of the flood is given in broad strokes. But in the Book of Jubilees, every single event is tied to a precise calendar date. The author essentially superimposes his 364-day calendar onto the flood narrative, and in doing so reveals a stunning symmetry. Let's follow the calculation as Jubilees chapter 5 and 6 lay it out. The floodgates of heaven and the fountains of the deep are opened on the 17th day of the second month. The waters prevail upon the earth for 150 days. The ark finally comes to rest on the mountains of Ararat on the 17th day of the seventh month. The tops of the mountains become visible on the first day of the 10th month, and Noah finally opens the window of the ark on the first day of the first month of the following year. But here is the masterstroke. After the earth has dried, Noah and his family finally exit the ark. And when do they do so? According to Jubilees, it is on the 17th day of the second month of the next year. Do you see the perfect symmetry? The flood began on the 17th day of the second month, and it ended with Noah stepping onto dry ground on the exact same date 1 year later. The total duration of the cataclysm, from start to finish, from the first raindrop to the final step onto a cleansed earth, was exactly 1 full, perfect year. And how long is a perfect year according to the Book of Jubilees? Exactly 364 days. This is not an accident. This is a deliberate theological argument disguised as a historical narrative. The author is using the greatest act of divine judgment and recreation in history to validate his calendar. He is effectively saying, do you want proof that this is God's true calendar? Look at how God himself operated during the flood. His timing was perfect. The entire event, from beginning to end, fits perfectly within the 52-week structure of a 364-day year. For the ancient reader, this would have been a powerful, almost irrefutable piece of evidence. It demonstrated that the calendar of Jubilees was not just an abstract theory. It was the very rhythm that God himself used to orchestrate the most pivotal events in history. It was the master clock of the universe. We have seen the evidence for the 364-day calendar. We have seen its perfect architecture and its divine pedigree. Now we must turn to the other side of the conflict and examine the heart of the accusation. The Book of Jubilees does not just present its solar calendar as a better alternative. It condemns the lunar calendar of the temple establishment as a profound and dangerous sin. This is the core of the war for time. The author of Jubilees, speaking through the voice of the angel to Moses in chapter 6, issues a series of devastating charges against those who would follow the cycles of the moon. The first charge is that of pagan association. In the ancient Near East, the moon was an object of worship. Many of the surrounding pagan cultures had deities associated with the moon, such as the Mesopotamian god Sin or the Canaanite god Yarek. For the author of Jubilees, basing Israel's sacred calendar on the moon was a dangerous flirtation with idolatry. It was adopting the timekeeping methods of the very nations God had commanded them to be separate from. It was a step toward cultural and religious compromise. The second charge is that of violating the order of creation. According to Genesis, the sun was created to give light on the earth, to govern the day, and to serve as the primary marker for signs and seasons, and for days and years. The sun, in this view, was the ordained ruler of time. The moon was the lesser light, meant only to govern the night. To demote the sun and elevate the moon as the primary determiner of the sacred months was, in the eyes of Jubilees, an act of rebellion against the established hierarchy of creation. It was to favor the lesser light over the greater light, to choose the ruler of the night over the ruler of the day. But the third and most catastrophic charge is that of desecrating sacred time. This is the practical and devastating consequence of following the wrong calendar. Because the lunar year is shorter, those who follow it will inevitably celebrate the holy days on the wrong dates. The author warns that they will make the Day of Testimony a reproach and a profane day the festival day. They will mix holy with profane, celebrating on days that should be ordinary and treating holy days as if they were common. Listen to the severity of the warning in Jubilees 6. And all the children of Israel will forget and will not find the path of the years. And they will go wrong as to the months and Sabbaths and feasts and Jubilees. To the author, this was not a small error. It was a complete spiritual dislocation. It was a nation that had lost its bearings in God's sacred time, a people adrift in a sea of chronological chaos, unable to meet with their God at his appointed times because they were looking at the wrong clock. For a long time, the radical claims of the Book of Jubilees about this calendar war could have been dismissed as the isolated polemic of a single fringe author. But the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the caves of Qumran transformed our understanding completely. The scrolls proved beyond any doubt that this was not a hypothetical debate. It was a real, bitter and schismatic conflict. The community at Qumran, believed to be the Essenes, was living proof of this war for time. Among the treasures found in those caves were not only 15 copies of the Book of Jubilees itself, but numerous other texts that were entirely dedicated to the 364-day solar calendar. These texts, known as Mishmarot, are detailed rosters, laying out the schedule for the priestly courses to serve in the temple, all based on the perfect 52-week cycle. They are practical, working documents, the day planners of a community obsessed with chronological purity. The very existence of this community, living in self-imposed exile in the barren desert, was a profound act of protest, and their writings make the reason for their separation crystal clear. One of their foundational texts, known as the Community Rule, condemns the religious leaders in Jerusalem for being seekers of smooth things, for compromising and straying from the true path. And one of the chief reasons for this condemnation was the calendar. The Essenes at Qumran believed that the temple priesthood in Jerusalem had become corrupt and illegitimate. And a key piece of evidence for this corruption was their adoption of what the Essenes considered a flawed, pagan-influenced lunar calendar. They believed that by celebrating the feasts on the wrong days, the priests in Jerusalem were rendering the entire sacrificial system null and void. The Day of Atonement, the holiest day of the year, was being profaned because it was being observed on a date calculated by men, not by the unchanging order of God's Son. Therefore, they retreated. They went into the desert to create a new covenant community, a temple of men, where they could live in ritual purity and, most importantly, worship God according to His true, revealed calendar. They did not just believe in the 364-day year, they structured their entire lives around it. They were a community that had seceded from mainstream Judaism, and the foundational issue of their secession was time itself. The scrolls of Qumran are the fossilized evidence of this ancient schism, a testament to a group of people who were so committed to worshipping God on the right day that they were willing to abandon the most sacred site on earth to do it. The evidence from Qumran allows us to reconstruct the battle lines of this ancient war for time. This was not just a disagreement. It was a fundamental clash between two different systems, two opposing spiritual worlds, each claiming to be the true heir of the Mosaic covenant. On one side, you have the temple establishment in Jerusalem. This is the center of institutional power. It is led by the high priest and the Sadducean aristocracy, men who were often as much politicians as they were religious leaders. They controlled the vast wealth of the temple, they negotiated with the Roman occupiers, and they presided over the national sacrificial system. Their calendar was the lunar calendar. It was a system that reinforced their power, as it was the high priest's court that had the authority to officially declare the start of a new month based on the testimony of witnesses. It was a calendar of centralized human authority. On the other side, you have the wilderness community at Qumran. This is a community of purists, of dissenters. They viewed the temple as corrupt, its priesthood as illegitimate, and its calendar as an abomination. They retreated to the desert, a place of spiritual testing and renewal, to live out what they believed was a more authentic version of the faith. Their calendar was the solar calendar of Jubilees and Enoch. It was a system that required no human authority to interpret. It was fixed, eternal, and revealed directly from heaven. It was a calendar of divine, unchangeable authority. Imagine the tension. While the crowds in Jerusalem were celebrating Passover according to the lunar cycle, the community at Qumran was marking the day on their own, different date, believing that they alone were in sync with the angels in heaven. While the high priest in Jerusalem entered the Holy of Holies on the lunar Day of Atonement, the teacher of righteousness at Qumran was likely leading his community in prayer, denouncing the Jerusalem service as an empty and profane ritual performed on a common day. This was a schism that cut to the very heart of Jewish identity. It was a debate about the nature of authority. Does it reside in an institution, in the office of the high priest, or does it reside solely in the revealed written word, in texts like Jubilees that claimed a direct line to heaven? It was a conflict between a faith of pragmatism and political reality and a faith of uncompromising absolute purity. The temple and the wilderness, the lunar and the solar, human calculation and divine revelation. These were the two sides in the war for God's time. If the 364-day solar calendar was so theologically powerful, so mathematically elegant, and so fiercely defended by devout communities like the one at Qumran, why did it fail? Why is it now a historical curiosity rather than the living calendar of Judaism and Christianity? The answer is a combination of a single critical scientific flaw and the overwhelming force of historical reality. First, let's address the practical problem. The 364-day calendar, for all its symbolic perfection, has one major astronomical flaw. A true solar year, the time it takes for the Earth to orbit the Sun, is not 364 days. It is approximately 365¼ days. This means that the calendar of Jubilees, while internally consistent, would have quickly fallen out of sync with the actual seasons. Every year, it would lose over a day. After just a decade, it would be off by nearly 2 weeks. After a century, the spring festivals would be taking place in the middle of summer. This phenomenon, known as calendrical drift, is a fatal flaw for any calendar tied to an agricultural society. The authors of Jubilees and the community at Qumran were aware of this problem, and scholars have found fragmented texts suggesting they were working on complex systems of intercalation over long periods to correct it. But the fact remains that their base number was astronomically inaccurate. However, the scientific flaw was not the primary reason for its failure. The ultimate reason was political and historical. The 364-day calendar was the system of the dissenters, the Purists, the communities in the wilderness. The lunar calendar was the system of the establishment. It was the calendar of the temple, the center of Jewish economic, political, and religious life. When the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD, they also wiped out the various sectarian groups, including the Essenes at Qumran. The branch of Judaism that survived and went on to define the future was the Pharisaic tradition, which became Rabbinic Judaism. And the rabbis, in their wisdom, chose to continue with and standardize the very lunar solar calendar that had been the official calendar of the temple. History is written by the victors, and in the war for time, the lunar calendar of the temple establishment was the undisputed victor. It survived not necessarily because it was more theologically correct, but because the institutions and the people who used it survived. The 364-day calendar, along with the communities that championed it, was buried under the rubble of history, only to be rediscovered 2,000 years later in the caves by the Dead Sea. After excavating the details of this ancient and bitter conflict, what is the ultimate lesson for us today? The specific debate over 364 versus 354 days may seem distant, but the underlying principle at the heart of the conflict is eternal and profoundly relevant. The passion and conviction behind the 364-day calendar was driven by a single, powerful theological truth. Our God is a God of order, not of chaos. The entire universe, as described in the Genesis account, is a testament to this truth. God did not create a chaotic mess. He created a cosmos, a word that in its original Greek, cosmos, means order, harmony, and adornment. He separated light from darkness. He set boundaries for the sea. He placed the celestial bodies in predictable, rhythmic courses. Creation itself was an act of bringing divine order to a formless void. The 364-day calendar, with its perfect symmetry, its repeating patterns, and its unwavering consistency, was seen by its adherents as the ultimate reflection of this divine character. It was a calendar that mirrored the mind of God, a mind of precision, purpose, and perfect design. In contrast, they saw the lunar calendar, with its fluctuating months, its reliance on fallible human observation, and its constant need for clumsy, man-made corrections like leap months, as a reflection of the chaos of the fallen world. It was a system that seemed arbitrary, unpredictable, and subject to human error and manipulation. This is the larger lesson for us. While we may no longer follow these specific ancient calendars, the principle remains. God operates according to a divine order. There is a rhythm to his redemptive plan, a structure to his laws, and a purpose behind his appointed times. The world we live in, however, is a world that celebrates chaos. It encourages spontaneity over discipline, personal feeling over divine principle, and moral relativism over absolute truth. The war for time was ultimately a battle for this principle. It was a fight to align human life with the divine order of the universe. It serves as a powerful reminder for us today to seek out God's intended order in every area of our lives, in our families, in our finances, in our personal conduct, and most importantly, in our worship. For to worship a God of order in a spirit of chaos is a fundamental contradiction. The ancient war between the solar and lunar calendars forces us to ask a deeply personal and practical question. In the 21st century, whose time are we living on? Are we living on God's time, or are we living on man's time? The adherents of the 364-day calendar believed that time itself was sacred. The division of the year, the rhythm of the weeks, the observance of the Sabbath and the feasts, these were not mere cultural traditions. They were divine appointments, sacred moments carved out of the flow of time by God Himself for the purpose of communion with His people. To miss these appointments was to miss a meeting with the King of the universe. Their entire lives were structured around conforming to this divine schedule. Now, look at our modern world. We are governed by a different clock. It is the clock of the global economy, a clock that never stops. It demands 24/7 productivity. It blurs the lines between work and rest, between the sacred and the secular. It is a relentless, exhausting rhythm that values efficiency over worship and profit over peace. This is man's time. It is a system that, by its very nature, is hostile to the concept of sacred, set-apart time. This is where the ancient conflict becomes intensely relevant. Are we allowing our lives to be dictated entirely by the chaotic, demanding rhythm of the world? Or are we intentionally, deliberately carving out and protecting sacred time in our lives, aligning ourselves with God's rhythm? This goes deeper than just attending church on Sunday. It is about the principle of Sabbath rest, a deliberate cessation from work and worry, a weekly declaration that God, not our own effort, is our provider. It is about creating rhythms of daily prayer and study, moments where we intentionally step off the world's frantic treadmill and onto the holy ground of communion with God. The war for time is still being fought, not in the courts of ancient priests, but in the schedules and priorities of our own lives. The pressure to conform to the world's calendar, to sacrifice rest for work, to neglect communion for entertainment, is immense. The lesson from the Purists of Qumran and the author of Jubilees is a call to courageous non-conformity. It is a call to recognize that time is not a neutral commodity. It is a sacred gift, and the highest use of that gift is to align our personal clocks with the timeless, life-giving rhythm of our Creator. We now arrive at the final and most dangerous lesson from this ancient war for time. The story of the two calendars is more than just a history of a theological dispute. It is the ultimate case study, a permanent historical exhibit of how easily and how completely human tradition can usurp, corrupt, and ultimately replace the clear commands of God. Think about the progression. God, according to Jubilees, established a perfect, divinely ordered calendar. Over time, for reasons of practicality or political convenience or pagan influence, the religious establishment in Jerusalem adopted a different system, a lunar-based calendar that required constant human calculation and intervention. Then, over more time, this humanly managed system became so entrenched, so deeply embedded in the life of the nation, that it became the tradition. It became the way things have always been done. Eventually, this tradition became so powerful that when a text like the Book of Jubilees or a community like the Essenes arose and challenged it, pointing back to what they believed was the original divine command, they were the ones who were labeled as heretics. They were the ones who were considered divisive, radical, and dangerous. The human tradition had become so normalized that the divine command now looked like a strange and foreign idea. This is a terrifying pattern, and it has repeated itself countless times throughout the history of the faith. Jesus confronted this exact spirit in the Pharisees when he told them, "You have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions." And so, this ancient war for time leaves us with a final, piercing challenge. It forces us to look at our own faith, our own churches, our own denominations, and ask a deeply uncomfortable question. What are the lunar calendars of our time? What are the traditions, the practices, the doctrines that we have accepted without question, simply because that's the way we've always done it? What human ideas have we allowed to become so sacred that we would now consider the plain teaching of Scripture to be a radical and divisive threat? It could be our style of worship. It could be our structure of church government. It could be our interpretation of prophecy. The specific issue is less important than the principle. The war for time is a call to become discerning believers. It is a call to cultivate a spirit that is more loyal to the eternal, written word of God than to the comfortable, familiar traditions of men. It is a call to constantly test everything, to hold on to what is good, and to have the courage to discard any tradition, no matter how beloved, if it is found to be in opposition to the divine order of God. Our investigation into the ancient war for time is now complete. We began with a simple, unsettling question. Are we worshipping God on the right day? This question led us to uncover a lost, sacred calendar of 364 days, a system of perfect mathematical and theological harmony. We have examined its divine architecture, traced its origins back to the heavenly tablets and the patriarchs, and seen how the Great Flood itself was used as a cosmic proof of its validity. We have also exposed the heart of the conflict, the fierce condemnation by the Book of Jubilees of the lunar calendar as a pagan compromise that desecrates sacred time. We have seen the fossilized evidence of this war in the scrolls of Qumran, a testament to a community so devoted to this principle that they abandoned the temple itself. And we have understood that this conflict is a timeless lesson on the danger of allowing human tradition to overwrite divine command. The purpose of this investigation was not to compel you to adopt a 364-day calendar. The purpose was to awaken you to a deeper truth, that God is a God of divine order, and that history is filled with forgotten battles over truths that were once considered essential. It is a call to be vigilant, to be discerning, and to constantly measure our practices against the unwavering standard of God's Word. If the calendar of heaven was written on celestial tablets, what else was recorded there? If the rhythm of our years was a matter of such divine importance, what about the rhythm of our lives? In our next special investigation, we will explore an even more profound and unsettling concept from these ancient texts, the heavenly tablets. We will ask the ultimate question of destiny and free will. Is it possible that the entire course of our lives, every choice, every triumph, every tragedy, was written in a celestial book before the foundation of the world? Do not miss it.